I destroyed a brewery. Nearly 20 years ago, I was a brewer at a brewpub. The owner was a complete lunatic and utter a-hole. Before I was hired, he had already purchased the brewery equipment, used, from a closed microbrewery. Problem is, it was literally 4 times larger than it needed to be for the size of the place, and to top it off he was selling Big 3 beers too. And it was a Pugsley system, brewers will know. But I made it work, even got the stupid Ringwald yeast to behave. But I only need to brew about 3 or 4 times a month. I have worked at places we brewed that much a week, so I wasn't needed anywhere near 40 hours per week. And I was salaried, so he decided I needed to work night manager at least 2 nights a week, to fill out my hours. That was fine, it was an easy gig. After our first year, he advertised a huge anniversary event, with specials on food and drink. Food specials, commercial beer specials, and didn't even mention that we made our own, much less put anything on special. Idiot. Not too long after, I got my first vacation in over a year. And he was mad at me for insisting. But life was stressful, not least of which because my mom was in hospice, stage 4 cancer. But her condition was such that she said my wife and I should go, she'll be fine. So we went camping for a week. The day before our trip was to end, we got word she had died. 2 days earlier. My family didn't know how to reach us, only she did. We rushed home, 6-hour drive, and on the way I called my boss and told him what had happened, and that I probably would not be in on Monday as planned. This was Saturday. I found out later from a bartender that he then bitched at the chef that I was probably going to want more time off. I did in fact take Monday off, but I went in on Tuesday to do my night manager shift. Now, my mom's wishes were to be cremated, with no embalming, so by the time I got home, she was already cremated. So the memorial service was planned for 2 weeks later, right before Labor Day weekend. There was to be a memorial service Thursday, and the interment for the family Friday. So I planned and made sure that the servers were full and I wouldn't need to brew for at least a week. That Wednesday the boss comes and tells me he wants me to work night shift on Thursday and Friday. Normally I did Tuesday and Wednesday nights, to make up for the time off I'd taken to help my dad out. He wasn't handling it well. He wanted me to come in after my mom's funeral. I flatly refused, at which point he said fine, but I'd have to work a double shift Saturday then. I nearly lost it. I walked away, and after I cooled off I went back and told him I was no longer going to do the manager shifts, and that I wanted to switch to hourly for brewery work only. He was angry, but stuck. He needed me in the brewery. Things started calming down, but after a few weeks I noticed my paychecks were for less than I anticipated. I hadn't been tracking my clock in clock out very closely, because prior to this I only clocked in and out, so I was logged in to do manager functions, but I happened to have a couple of slips in my wallet, and because I still had manager access, discovered he had been altering my hours, eventually cheating me out of around 20 hours in just 6 weeks. What kind of person does this? You pay the person for their work, okay. If you can't do that, then maybe you should just close your business for good. That's not a good managing. And that's when I hatched my plan. I was done with this a-hole. Remember that Ringwood yeast? Well, in a brewery, you harvest yeast from a fermenting batch to use to brew a later one. And since we were slow, it often had to be stored for a while before it got used. But you had to use it within 30 days, 21 is better, or it goes sour and starts dying. Normally I would take other steps to ensure it stayed clean and healthy, but not on the last batch I harvested. It just went into the cold room. And stayed there. I stopped going in very often, just logging tank levels to make sure nothing ran out and made him suspicious. I would even go in to make sure he wasn't in that day, and later message him that I'd brewed, I hadn't. And waited. On day 45, after I got the check for the last hours I worked, I overnighted my keys in with a resignation letter. He called me the next day, screaming. I told him I knew what he'd done, and I wouldn't be back. I don't know what he looked like when he went into the brewery cellar and discovered he had empty fermenters, nearly empty serving tanks, dead yeast, and almost no grain. Pity really. After that, he tried to hire my former assistant, who was working at another brewpub by then because the a-hole had forced me to fire him to save money. He laughed at him. He then apparently got the underage son of one of the brewers at a nearby brewpub which he had originally been part of to brew for him, but had to fire him because the kid kept getting caught drunk down in the cellar. So he tried doing it, and I had heard they stopped brewing entirely eventually. About a year after I left, he folded. Staff showed up one morning to padlocked doors. Drove through there a few years back. Not only gone but building was torn down. I felt like stopping to sow the ground with salt, but I was in a hurry, so I guess the business closed for good, huh? Well, you have to value your employee so that they can provide you better work and assurance of quality. I'm not saying that the a-hole manager deserved this, but I think he learned his lesson. Giving away a Master Sergeant's golf clubs. So many years ago I was a logistician in the United States Marine Corps. My unit was headed overseas on a little mini deployment to Morocco. I was in charge of the logistics in my unit even though I was only a corporal. This was because first we didn't have a staff sergeant to run the shop and the sergeants we had were garbage at logistics and got put to work for me. So anyways, we're gearing up to go on this little mini deployment and the master sergeant who was going to be the highest ranking enlisted comes over to my office to chat. He starts off being real cool and then eventually asks if he can bring his golf clubs within one of our containers. I thought to myself that it would be wise to be on his good side since I was only a corporal and going on a deployment with his company. So I agreed, even though it was against the rules and regulations. However, everyone does it all the time. This proves that not all official is following the rules. This is an example of it. So anyways, we go to Morocco and he has his clubs. No course in sight, but he was happy hitting balls, so I didn't care. However, then everything changed. His Marines didn't request to bring enough materials to build what we were there for. They start saying I'm missing a 20-feet container, which doesn't happen to me. So I finally solved the mystery. It turns out they didn't request to bring enough and left the materials behind their office. So here we are in Africa to do a job, but we don't have enough materials. So he tries to use me as a scapegoat. Even a gunnery sergeant and a staff sergeant of his get in on this and just treat me like because I refused to take the fall for their shops. This goes on for the entire 2 months we are there, and we are in the middle of nowhere, so nothing for me to do but deal. Anyways, we start heading home and we head back to civilization to a port, and we had to clean our gear to go back to the US as per customs and biosecurity. So we are cleaning everything. Even tank had to take tanks off their tracks and clean the tracks. It was a pain in the ass, but still a cool experience. The problem, however, was that the master sergeant kept needing to reopen containers that had been finished. Now the problem with this was that we had to have actual US customs agents on site and use their banding seals to seal the containers, which then had to be documented with the unique serial number. Every time we had to open one, I had to beg the customs agents to open them and let us get whatever the master sergeant needed and them close it up without having to redo the cleaning. Normally it is a solid no, but the agents were cool, and we worked it out. Plus every night I usually ran into them at the bars and I would buy them beer. It got to the point where the agents didn't even have any of their own seals left because of how many times we did it. They ended up using mine to reseal. It really made things difficult, and it was often for dumb shit. So finally I had it. It was literally the last day we had for cleaning, and of course the MSGT wanted something else. So I asked the agents. They were really fed up of it. However, I then asked, "Do either of you guys golf?" One of them said yes. I said then we need 2 containers opened. So we got the dumb shit for the MSGT. Then we went to the other container where I knew the MSGT's golf clubs were hiding. I opened the container, pulled out the clubs and gave them to the agent. He looked at me and I just said, "I don't wanna hear shit about opening any more containers." He was cool with it and got it in his car. No issues from there on. Anyways, we get back to the States and the ship pulls in with the gear and we got it home no problem. A week later the MSGT comes in my office. He's all buddy-buddy again. He then asks where his golf clubs were. I said, my guess is your garage or your closet. He forces a chuckle and goes, ha ha, okay come on dog, where's my clubs? I then said, I don't know what you're talking about MSGT. He then said, my club's in the container. I then explained to him that per the Department of Transportation Regulation Chapter 3, I even had it down to the sub-chapter and paragraph letter, that no personal gear can be shipped inside of military cargo containers. He then starts getting mad and I keep repeating the paragraph. He loses it. Grabs me, but my shop's GSGT got to him quick and pulled him off before he swung on me. He never did find out what I did to his clubs, and I left the unit about 6 months later to go to my next command. The master sergeant must be pissed off because of this. Just because they are letting you do anything you want with your power, it doesn't mean that you have to abuse it. Try to squeeze my dad for his money, tough luck. He knows money. The background: back during the 1997 Asian financial crisis, Malaysia was hit pretty hard, especially the small independent banks. The Prime Minister at the time, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, passed a bill to save the banking economy by having all the larger corporate banks buy out the smaller independent banks. At the same time, he made the One Malaysia Home Loan Policy. Under this, all larger banks that bought out the smaller independent banks must send an acknowledgement letter to the home loaners of their original bank stating the home loan change and must receive an acknowledgement from their new loaners, be it a signature, physical or digital. The story: my dad never liked how banks can legally rob people. For people like him who works the daily grind, having to pay the bank what is essentially 2 houses worth in interest payments over 2 or 3 decades is just plain wrong in his eyes. He strives to one day screw a bank over like how they screw their customers, a contract. Be it sheer dumb luck or as God listened to his prayers and decided to grant him that opportunity, that was what he got. When my dad bought our family's first home, he got a loan from a small bank called DCB Bank. All is well, until a few years later the 1997 financial crisis hit. As the small banks were bought out by the larger banks, many home loaners received acknowledgement papers on their new home loan payment plan and policies by their new banks. My dad for whatever reason never received this. He only knew that his original bank was bought over by the RHB Bank Corporation, and that he is now and officially their customer. My dad was frugal with his money and God bless him, financially literate. He knew that if he made a full settlement against his principal loan, he can avoid paying 30 years worth of installments. Sometime in 2007, he went to a RHB Bank branch nearby to make a full settlement, and this is how it went down. I'm sorry sir. Even if you made a full settlement, you would still need to continue making payments for the interest. What do you mean? I have a home loan contract under DCB that states I can make a full settlement without paying for additional interests. True, but since you've acknowledged and signed under RHB, I've never received the acknowledgement papers. I never signed any papers from your bank, and all I have here is the DCB Bank contract. Sir, under the One Malaysia Home Loan, you have to send acknowledgement letters about the loan transfer. Yes, I know. What I want now is for you, RHB Bank, to produce my signature of me acknowledging the new loan policy for RHB. As of now, my paper with DCB is still valid until you produce my signature. Q1 hour of the employer and her colleagues scrambling around their files and databases trying to find any acknowledgement from my dad about their loan contract. At this time, the manager of the bank had called my dad into his office to discuss this problem. It basically had went from civil to a shouting match that can be heard in the neighboring food stalls. My dad couldn't remember most of what was said, but the end of it was what he could still clearly remember, and to his son, it was probably one hell of a badass convo ender. I'm sorry Mr. Muhammad. but you still need to make the interest payments, regardless of whether you make a full settlement. Alright, I understand. I'll just have take this up to Bank Negara, National Bank of Malaysia. Let them help you find that signature of mine. My dad had the bank manager at the balls now. Rather risking a potential $1 million lawsuit and possibly losing his job, he excused himself to make a few phone calls to upper management, which took about half an hour. After said phone calls were done, the manager approached my dad, and agreed to the full settlement without the additional interest installments. To add salt to the wound, my dad requested that they have his housing grant ready within the week, to which they delivered. All in all, my dad managed to secure himself a house, the housing grant, and in the process screwed RHB Bank of what is equal to 60,000 United States dollars worth of interest payments, which to a middle-class Malaysian in 2007 is a retirement fund. Too long didn't read. Bank's incompetence saved my dad a ton of money in interest payments. What a lucky guy. He secured himself a ton of money. Well, it's the bank's fault for not giving him the settlement letter. What a wise man. That's all for this video. For the meantime, please watch this video while you still doesn't have an idea on what video to watch next. If you want more of this story or another story, just use the comment section. Thank you.